Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at some of the government interventions that we studied in the first unit, and we're going to see how those same government interventions, price ceilings, price floors, taxes, subsidies, tariffs, quotas, see how they affect surplus and deadweight loss. So let's get started. So first thing I'll just say is that I'm not going to spend a lot of time re-explaining in this video what these particular interventions do. If you are not sure what these interventions are all about, you're going to want to go back and rewatch the government interventions video that I made describing just kind of what the effects of these particular things are. So we know that, we've got a price ceiling as a maximum price. And so that's going to be straight across below whatever our P star value is going to be. Now, what will happen is that now we know there's only going to be this amount. The quantity supplied at that amount is the number of transactions. And so then we're going to go all the way up and stop on that demand curve. And here's what we're going to label. We're going to label the producer surplus, the consumer surplus, and the deadweight loss. Now, we know that they're only transacting this much. And the optimal amount would be Q star. Whoops, I put QS. I was just brain fart right there. Brain fart. Q star. And so we know that they're not producing the optimal amount of transactions. And so we can actually start by just starting out by shading our deadweight loss. It is this same triangle, and we're going to see this triangle in a lot of places. It's going to show up in a lot of places. That's our deadweight loss. That's the value of the transactions that aren't happening anymore. Now, the price ceiling, if we go down from the price ceiling down to the supply curve, that's going to be our producer surplus. And our consumer surplus is all of the area above it, because the consumers get to pay this low price, and it goes all the way up to the demand curve. So it's going to be this much larger kind of trapezoidal shape. And it's sometimes helpful to just kind of look at like what a graph would be without these interventions. So I'm just going to go consumer surplus, producer surplus. And so you can see we lost some, like we shaved off that triangle, and we reallocated some producer surplus and turned it into consumer surplus, which is what we'd expect to happen with a maximum price. You help out some buyers, you hurt the sellers. Now let's take a look at what happens with a price floor. Now, a price floor, as we know, is going to be set above the equilibrium value, or else it won't be binding. And so we'll go ahead and put our Q star, and this is going to be a star that time, and P star. And we know that a price floor will be way up here. So we'll put PF. Now, we also know from that price floor that the only amount that's quantity demanded is going to be here. That's the amount of transactions that will actually happen. And so it's pointing again, this deadweight loss is the value of the transactions that are not happening, the consumer and producer surplus that no longer will exist. And it's again kind of pointing toward what that optimal looks like. But here we can see now the consumer's surplus is a little bit smaller, right, than maybe what we'd expect. And that's because, again, they're playing that higher price. And the area under the price, all the way under the price ceiling, all the way to the original supply curve and down, well, that's going to be our producer surplus. So as we would expect, a price floor, minimum price, that's going to help out some of the producers. And you can kind of, again, visually see the producers are getting some of that consumer surplus, and we're losing some of it to deadweight loss. Now let's take a look at a tax system here. We already did this one in the previous video, so I am going to be pretty quick on this one. We're just going to say supply and demand, and we do know that we have an S tax curve, and we go over and drop straight down from there. That's our quantity after the tax. Now, the area above the price that the buyers paid is going to be our consumer surplus. Right? Our consumer surplus. And we know that the sellers, well, they get to keep what's on that original supply curve. So that's the seller price. And that's going to lead to our producer surplus being a little bit smaller. So again, and I probably should use different letters here, right? Price that the sellers have and producer surplus. This is the seller gets to keep. So I'm going to put that off to the side. Just say seller keeps, right? That amount. And that's what that PS refers to. So hopefully that doesn't mix you up too much. We learned in the last video that if you have QT transactions, then you have the tax revenue is the big box, and our deadweight loss points to that original optimal quantity, and we can shade it thusly. So we still have our deadweight loss. Now let's take a look at subsidies, right? So subsidies are going to be a little trickier. I'm going to zoom out just a shade here, even though I think it might be a little tough. We'll see, right? We'll see if we can make this happen. The subsidy graph is one of the weirdest ones that we're going to do. Really, really weird. So here's why. All right, we're going to be a little quieter. It's going to be kind of strange. We know that S sub is going to be like below it. And here's where it gets wild. Here's where this gets totally wild. This is Q star. This is the new quantity. Okay. And we've got, this is the buyer price. And I know that because this is the demand curve. So that tells me the buyer price. How much does the seller get to keep on the original supply curve? Right. So I'm going to say the price the seller keeps. And I know that that still messes us up. But here's what's crazy, right? If we go from the price the buyer pays all the way over and up the original demand curve, all right? This triangle is our consumer surplus, as it goes from the buyer price up to what they actually were willing to pay, right? So this is the price they paid up to what they were willing to pay. Now let's do the sellers, what they got to keep. Well, they got paid PS. And we're going to go down that original supply curve, right? Not the S sub. And it's going to be overlapping. Right? And so in fact, you've got overlapping surpluses in this middle area right here. It's crazy, but there's more. So the height of it, I know, is the amount of the subsidy. And if I go all the way over, right, that means that this box that's right here is the subsidy cost. So it's hard to see it, but it's actually this box right here. I told you this graph's going to be crazy, right? Now, one last. So if I know that we've got, of this box, the big box, some of it got turned into producer surplus and some of it got turned into consumer surplus. But there's one part of that box that did not, of this whole box. And that part is the deadweight loss. And in fact, it's a triangle pointing us toward that optimal point in the middle. So this kind of area right here, from Q sub back over to Q star, it's like the triangle is pointing the other way, right? On this one, you have a triangle that's kind of pointing this way. And on this one, the triangle is kind of pointing the other way, actually, with this back of the triangle being the Q sub and Q star still being right here. So that one is really, really hard. You will not have to graph one of these puppies, right? So don't worry about that, but you will maybe see questions about interpreting it. And so I wanted you to see it. Don't freak out. You're fine, right? You're going to be okay. You're not going to have to graph the whole thing. But if you see a picture of it, it's actually an interesting one. You've got overlapping surpluses and you've got the deadweight loss pointed the other way. You got a big box that's the cost of the government. It's a cool graph. All right, let's do tariffs. Tariffs are also going to be a little crazy. They're going to be a little crazy. Today's a crazy day, right? You're getting to learn how all kinds of stuff works. Your brain's getting so big. I bet your brain hurts. Now, we know we've got here, right, the world price. And this is where things get kind of crazy too, right? The old producer surplus is just this little area right here, just that little area. But then when I push it up with a tariff, that world price, let's say it's a $2 tariff and I shifted it up. So that's the world price plus the tariff. Now my producer surplus is going to go all the way to up here, right? So I'm going to have this producer surplus. My consumer surplus is going from the price the buyers pay all the way over to the number of transactions that are going to happen. So that's the quantity of transactions. And now I'm going to go all the way up over the demand curve. This whole area is our consumer surplus, including this little bottom of the triangle, right? Because it's going from the price they paid, which is world price plus T, up to the demand curve. And here's where things get kind of crazy. We come down. This amount is the amount that's supplied domestically. We know that because that's the supply curve. This is the amount that's imported after the tariff. So again, if you're struggling with remembering this, you can go back and look at your notes from the last time, right? This is after the tariff, how much they import. And we know the amount of the tax was $2. And so actually the box that's here in the middle, this little box, is actually the revenue to the government because it's a $2 tax on imports, and these are the number of imports. So here's where it gets crazy. The deadweight loss is actually these little tiny triangles off to the side. And we're going to have a little practice problem here in a minute that's going to show that very concept. So In a hot sec, you're going to be taking a look at it. But these are the areas of the old surplus that would have been around. Oh, hopefully we'll get my battery going. These are the areas of the old surplus that would have been there if we had been allowed to trade at WP. And we're going to do a little practice problem with this one later. I think it's in the extra practice. Last but not least is going to be quotas. This one's going to be super easy, super fast. I promise we'll finish with an easy one, put you back on your feet. Last thing I'll say maybe about that tariffs, you're not going to have to draw one of those either, right? So of these graphs, yes, price ceilings, yes, price floors, yes, taxes, no subsidies, no tariffs, but you may have to see pictures of them and interpret. You may see a graph also of a quota. So we're going to say quota. And I'm saying may because that's actually what College Board tells me. They tell me you might see it or you might have to actually draw one, right? And so we use that kind of language. Now, we know the buyer is paying way up here, the buyer price. That's going to make the consumer surplus just this little tiny triangle up here. So the consumers really don't like those quotas. Now, if you are a seller, you get to sell from that buyer price all the way down to your original supply curve, right? So this picture actually is going to look a lot like the price floor, right? If you notice, consumer surplus, producer surplus, consumer surplus, producer. That's because it has actually basically the same effect. It squeezes the buyers and it helps some of the sellers. We get this huge, just based on how I've drawn it, this huge amount of deadweight loss. That's our triangle pointing us towards that optimal quantity. All right, so hopefully this helps you and didn't scare you off too much understanding surpluses with government interventions. I'll see you next time.